welcome everyone. Thank you for finding time and joining us for today's webinar. My name is Artem Firsov. I'm the project manager here at Velvetech. For over 20 years, we've been providing class-leading software solutions to our customers across a variety of industries. And as we help our clients address multiple tech and business challenges, we understand that the success of most projects relies not only on the implementation phase itself, but also on how realistic project estimates are. So today, we're going to discuss how to get those realistic estimates, and we'll be sharing some light on the key techniques that most software development companies use to evaluate IT projects at the start. And also highlight some pitfalls and practical tips that our experience allowed us to accumulate and successfully apply at work with our clients. So our speaker today, the CTO at Velvetech, Gregory Entin, has years of hands-on experience in the delivery of custom software solutions, tech consulting, and project management. And before passing the microphone to Gregory, I'd like to quickly mention that if you have any questions during the presentation, please type them in your Zoom chat. We'll have time for covering them at the end of our webinar, and I will be personally responsible for that. Now over to Gregory. Please enjoy the webinar. Hi, Gregory. Happy to see you today. I'm thrilled to start the webinar already. So are you ready to take over the microphone?
Sure. Thank you, Artemi. Thank you for introducing myself and the company. Hello, everyone. As Artemi has just mentioned, my name is Gregory. I'm over 20 years in software project, program, and portfolio management. I managed numerous projects, including larger ones with teams of several dozens of members that some of them took several years to complete. I'm a big fan of agile methodologies, and I believe that the agile approach is the answer to most questions of the software development process, including the very early stages of a project when the project budget is being discussed. Luckily, today we are discussing exactly this topic, project estimates, and how you as a client or a project manager or project sponsor can make sure that the project budget is reasonable and realistic. As you may know from our experience, from your own experience, it's quite common in the industry that projects do not fit the allotted budget and/or time. Some studies show that large software development projects may run 45% over budget, with significant percentage of projects running over time, and also the scope of the projects may be reduced also significantly. For example, McKinsey report, which is back 10 years ago, shows such statistics. And obviously, nobody likes it. Such situations certainly affect businesses, regardless of their size. Large corporations can find it hard to allocate additional funding due to the complexity of the internal procurement process, and smaller startups are rushing to ambitious deadlines, and failing to meet them may just mean that the startup will fail in the competition. And all this story starts at the very beginning, when the project budget is being discussed and approved. A realistic estimate needs certain prerequisites, and one of the most important are the project requirements. As you may know, there are functional, non-functional, and requirements that are connected to regulation and standards that needs to be followed. So if you speak about functional requirements, those covers questions like what is the business purpose of the system, who will be using it, how these people or departments or companies will be using it. Will the system talk or communicate with any external systems, other systems? What functionality is needed? How does the system compare to other systems on the market and potential some competitors? Those are quite simple questions, but sometimes project owner doesn't have answers to them. And it's good if you can answer them to yourself and to a vendor who is bidding on a project. And also non-functional requirements are very important. For example, that scale, how many users will be there, performance constraints, like how fast the system should be, any compatibility requirements, for example, what devices will be used to access the system, or should there be support for mobile or desktop or maybe tablet devices. Also about security, how secure should the system be? Should the system have some additional layers of protection? For example, data encryption in the database, or architecture with some isolated infrastructure, or maybe some approaches like zero trust architecture, or also reliability requirements. For example, maybe it's a mission critical system, or even people's lives are at stake. So those are very important questions that need to be answered upfront, because those answers may affect the estimates greatly. Imagine you are building a small online store with just a few visitors a day and compare it to a future competitor of Amazon, for example. So, and as of for regulations or standards, for example, if you're building a system for healthcare industry, you may need to comply with HIPAA or PCI for financial industry, or different ISO standards can need to be followed because of the laws, industry common practice, or because your users or clients just require it. And passing through certifications or adherence to some complicated standards may lead to the project budget increase by a factor of 2 or even 4, and the timelines may be affected even more than that. And it can be quite a long road with certifications and passing those validations and approvals. Also, you need to know your constraints. It is very essential thing, and it needs to be discussed from the start, because and sometimes, even not sometimes, but frequently, it is forgotten by the clients and some of the software vendors. And here I'm talking about things like project budget, scope, or timeline constraints that exist. Understanding them is crucial for the project sponsor, project owner, or project manager, because without that knowledge, you put yourself at an extremely high risk of project failure. These constraints may not be exact. They can be, for example, ranges. And for example, you may set a budget of $100,000 to $200,000 for the project, and it needs to be done in, say, 3 to 4 months, and it should include that and this functionality. But those constraints are very important to understand, and it is actually very safe to share those constraints with the team who works on the estimate, as this is very affecting the estimates and timelines and the final proposals that you get. Some clients are reluctant to tell what the budget limitations are because they fear that a software vendor may try to overprice the work. Well, that's not usually the case. If you receive a well-defined and structured estimate breakdown with all the work items needed to be performed to deliver the project scope, and then review it yourself line by line, you can always understand what makes the cost and time of the development, and what are the opportunities to optimize this. So now let's focus on the process, how the software project estimates are generally made. There are several techniques that help the estimator to deliver a realistic estimate. And the slide, thank you, Artemy, shows them in general. So there are top-down, bottom-up, parametric, comparative estimates, 3-point estimates, expert judgment, and some others. Let's look at them in more detail. Okay, first of all, there is a top-down approach, which means that the project is broken into large pieces which in turn are decomposed into smaller ones. And this is done in an iterative manner. When the tasks are small enough, they can be estimated based on previous experience that the team has. For example, a login form for a web portal usually takes, for example, 4 hours of work. Then it will probably take the same amount of time for this particular project unless it differs greatly. And then there are metric-based approaches, and these estimating techniques, they obviously use metrics. For example, a large project may have 20 different reports. And the structure and complexity of those reports are more or less the same. Then with our previous experience, we can tell that a single report like this takes usually about 8 hours to implement. Then it's safe to assume that those 20 reports will take 30 multiplied by 8, which is 160 hours of work. And we can do this without going into too much detail about each of the reports. And this obviously saves time when we are estimating a project, and it doesn't compromise the estimate accuracy. And then there is approach called 3-point estimation. It's a technique that uses 3 different judgments for a task estimate. You can probably guess those are optimistic, most likely, and pessimistic. And then those are used to calculate a weighted average to get the estimate, which will have much better accuracy. And in fact, usually you may see all of those techniques used in conjunction. First, we start with a very rough breakdown of tasks, then we go deep enough into the detail and then use some of the parametric approaches and then utilize our previous experience. And sometimes we may have access to some statistics data even from our previous projects, if that's available, and improve finally the estimate by using that 3-point estimating technique. Next. And yeah, and analogous and expert judgment techniques are also in place. Thank you, Artemy. Can we go next slide? Yeah, speaking about use case points, that's also an option, but I will talk about this a bit later. Thank you. So now I would like to touch on the optimization practices, as it is quite common situation when project budget, timeline, and scope expectations do not match together. As a client, you may need more than you practically afford because of the importance of meeting some deadlines, for example, or because there is some strict project budget limit. And the solution here is not to bargain the cost or time with the vendor, but to perform detailed requirement analysis and also work on careful prioritization of the needs. And this is where you can use those budget optimization techniques. One of them is reducing the scope. That's obvious. If we do less, we can do it faster and cheaper. This doesn't necessarily mean that we remove big portions of functionality. It could be some lower priority tasks that just of low priority and can be scheduled for future phases. So we use a phased approach to deliver something which is critical and most important, and then go to the features and tasks that are of lower importance to the client. And then we also can consider technology alternatives, which mean that different technology stack, the use of some libraries or the use of some different technical approaches may save some time for the implementation. And also potentially we may review and potentially utilize some already third-party solutions or low-code platforms. And as well, we may consider the use of some open source, public domain software or libraries, which may cut the project budget and timeline significantly. Thank you. And there is one more, a very important budget optimization strategy I would like to share with you. It is based on an agile approach, which means that any budgets and estimates are prepared and revised iteratively. The first iteration usually gives a very raw breakdown of tasks. The accuracy of such an estimate made on that breakdown of tasks would be somewhere maybe at 30%, but it's often quite enough to gain the confidence required for the project budget allocation and the project staff. I don't say it's necessary to be 30% always. It can be maybe 5%, maybe 200% in your specific case, but still there is some confidence at this high level. And once the project is authorized and started, the backlog of sprints is formed. A typical sprint duration is 2 weeks. Sometimes you may see 1 week sprint or 3 week sprint, or even 4 week sprint, but the most typical is 2 week sprints. And what we do, we plan the tasks for each of the sprints, and those tasks form the sprint backlog of the project. And we usually recommend having at least 2, maybe 2 to 4 sprints full of the tasks. That means that you have quite a good plan for the upcoming 1 or 2 months. And our best practice is to estimate tasks in hours. And here is the note about story points. We don't usually use story points or other artificial units because they obscure the actual time needed for implementation. We practically use hours that represent the actual time a developer or business analyst or QA person need to do a certain task. And those estimates have much better accuracy and they allow you to have those sprints planned very realistically so that all the tasks or most of the tasks are delivered on time on the schedule. And what comes next, you do, and basically not only you, it's a joint venture and joint work of the client and the development team, you do continuous project backlog refinement, which means that you adjust per everything new that is being discovered or anything new that appears. For example, new requirements that were not known previously, or new constraints. It may be, for example, a new deadline because a new scheduled trade show and certain functionality need to be presented by this date. Or some technology limitations that were not obvious originally, and we face them during the project, and we need to somehow adjust and pivot our development based on those limitations. And actually, it can be the amount of time that was in reality spent on the tasks, which can be sometimes higher than the estimates and sometimes lower. And yes, it's the case. Some of the tasks take fewer amount of time than was planned. And this refinement may affect the task estimates and scope of the sprints. But the ultimate goal here is to maximize the value for the project stakeholders and taking into account all the constraints that we have. Once we have those accurately estimated and refined tasks and form the backlog of the project, along with a high-level project estimate for the future work, which didn't pass through the detailed estimation process, you can use that information to define and maintain a project timeline and a project roadmap. And this roadmap will definitely give you realistic ETAs for deliveries because it is backed with that agile process. And you may use that roadmap and present it to investor or project sponsors, or sometimes to end users who are desperate to see the new system coming. And the next very extremely important aspect of estimates to cover is quality management. Some of the software vendors may try to convince you to take the very attractive project offers, but they sometimes forget to tell what level of quality you may expect. For example, they may cut budgets by replacing the important work items like requirement analysis or unit testing or systematic manual testing or automatic end-to-end tests, and that's not a good idea at all. These activities may easily take 50% of the planned project budget, and not planning them ahead of time will result in unforeseen budget overruns, and those overruns may actually be much higher than the said 50% because you don't plan them to do at the proper time. And it also may result in poor quality, and this poor quality of software may be way below the industry standards. So the main approach for obtaining the required quality is to manage it, and you do this by planning it from the start. So you need to include it into the estimates. Essentially, this means that you need to answer questions like, what will be the unit test coverage? How many manual tests will be there? How they will be documented? How they will be run? What end-to-end tests will be there? And so on. Next. And now let's move to the next important topic. Tammy, could you please switch to the next? Yes, thank you. To the next topic. And this topic, you can see in this picture, you might think, what does it tech debt do with project budget and estimates? Well, they actually come hand by hand. It doesn't matter if you're building something new or improving an existing system, you may expect that there will be a certain amount of technical debt. It means that, for example, some of the code can be not in ideal shape, and this can be because it was modified during the project multiple times by different developers who were changing on the project. And as a consequence, the code is very complicated and poorly maintained, and it finally results in hard to find, hard to fix issues, some subtle instabilities that are very hard to catch and fix, also security or maybe performance issues, and of course, a lot of hours spent on maintaining the code. That's why the technical debt needs to be thought of, and activities should be planned ahead of time to manage and keep it in a reasonable level. And this needs to be done in alignment with your strategic plans as a project owner. So you need to invest in technical debt management from the beginning of the project, and you need to allocate some resources and time for that. Thank you. So the next topic is the importance of evaluating of the estimator, the person or the team or the vendor working on the estimate or project proposal. As we are getting closer to the final part, I want to highlight the role and essence of that team who works on the estimation. It may sound ambiguous, but when it comes to software project outsourcing for example, it's important for you to, as a prospective client, to evaluate the vendor before you go further with the project, and you need to understand that the team is doing the right job. Things you may look for include what industry experience that the vendor has. Do they know the business domain, or will they need to study it from scratch? Does the vendor know about relevant standards, guidelines, and certifications? And what technology expertise and how broad that technology expertise is for the vendor, and how does they use this knowledge to help you understand the technology constraints that may affect the project budget and project estimate. And also how the vendor is going to work with potential risks, because in any project, you may find that something is not going according to the plan. And the answer here is the plan that and the estimate that has some capacity and some resources and certain risk mitigation plan that would be in place to cover those risks. And also an important question, does the vendor have a plan to support the project after it is implemented and launched? So that's also quite an important question. And also, from another perspective, you need to carefully listen to the questions that are asked by the vendor, because they actually show what vendor understands and what is the level of understanding. If that team understands your needs, and then of course you need to listen carefully to what is finally offered. Sometimes you may be provided with a fixed budget proposal, or some fixed deadlines, fixed timeline, approach and proposal, or sometimes you can see estimates where the vendor or estimating team clearly do not know all the details and doesn't have enough information on the project. And all these examples may indicate that the vendor is trying to conceal something from you. And if the project scope is not defined, then project budget cannot be fixed. The same applies to deadlines. So sometimes salespeople may even try to get you in a trap by offering a low budget, but without a genuine commitment to that budget. And sometimes they may promise some unrealistic timelines. And that's true, that starting a new project is always a risk. And if you or your development partner is not seeing the full picture, you just increase this risk significantly. All right. So let's get it all together and recap what we have just discussed. As a client, you are in a position to help the vendor to estimate the right thing. What are the requirements, and what is the environment of the project? What are the expectations on the budget, timelines, any constraints because of the environment or regulations? If you know those things, this is good. Please share those things with your development partner, and they will use that information for good to make the estimate more reliable. And then you also need to be optimistic, but at the same time realistic. For example, if you are told that something can be done faster than it sounds to you reasonable, without explaining how this can be achieved, this is probably not going to happen. And the next thing is the agile process, which is often the key to success. Start with what is known and go into more and more detail and also plan it for the next several months and align this with a longer roadmap, which may span over so quarters or even years. And with that approach, you get quite a good picture where you are currently at and where would you go and how you achieve this. And finally, choose the right software development partner. In particular, review the estimate you got, cooperate with the vendor on it, see if the pre-project communication is reasonable, are they responsive, they answer questions, ask proper questions, do you understand what you are being offered, what is expected terms of the cost and time, and how the vendor will deal with the risks and how for the final results will be delivered to you. So that's pretty much it. We covered all the topics planned for today. Thank you very much for your attention. And now I will be happy to answer any of your questions. All right. And let me see what questions we have in the chat. So I see Chris BT is asking, you say Agile has 30% of accuracy, how to plan the whole budget and timeline in that case? Thank you, Chris, for that excellent question. In fact, the Agile approach is the answer. So if you have a project and that project has fixed budget, you don't have more money or more time that you have, and you got the estimate, and that estimate is obviously not very accurate at the beginning because not all the details are known, but you have allocated that amount of time and budget for the project. What happens next is that iterative process of delivery, where we break down the tasks, and once we break them down to smaller pieces which can be estimated in hours, we match those estimates to the total estimate of a big task that was included in the growth estimate, which makes the overall project budget. And we carefully monitor if we see that the amount of work that is needed to be done in the future to complete the project is more than the remaining budget, then probably something's going wrong. Something needs to be optimized. And then we use any of the optimization strategies explained previously, like cutting some of the budget, or cutting some of the functionality, prioritizing requirements, reusing some open source or ready solutions to replace certain pieces of the software, or investing some additional time in the analysis that can give the results on what pieces are of higher priority, things like that. And then when we face the situation that the budgetary run risk is high, then we act before this actually happened and make measures so that this risk will not happen. And in most of the situations, we find a suitable solution that in agreement with the global strategy of our client, we make it very open. We do not hide that something may go not as the planned, and this helps us to fix the issues before they actually become an issue. Thank you, Chris. It was an excellent question. And the next question that I see is from Jane Wilmans. Having several estimates from different vendors, how can I learn which one is the most relevant? That's a good one. Thank you, Jane. So actually, if you already have several estimates from several different vendors, you are at a safe spot. You are doing things right. It's like going to a doctor. If you go to a doctor and get some diagnosis and you think that that diagnosis may not be valid, or our doctor may missing something. What you do, you go to another doctor, maybe to a third doctor, and then you compare. Having several different estimates on the table gives you an opportunity to compare those, and you don't compare just by the numbers. You don't pick the cheapest or fastest one, because it's not always the best one. You compare them in more detail. You look what is being offered. You compare to what detail each of the vendors went preparing those estimates. You also look what's included, like testing, what debt management or quality management is included into the estimates. Try to find anything that may sound or look not reasonable. Ask questions, and then you pick the vendor that offers the most reasonable thing. And in terms of time and money, it can be somewhere in between of the lowest and highest offers that you may have. Thank you, Jane. And I see another question from Jane. How can I know if the estimate is overrated? Let's say a vendor claims 40 hours and my friend with some experience says it can be done in just 8 hours. Okay, great question. Thank you. That sometimes happens. It happens with our clients as well. Sometimes they're asking, okay, you quote this work that amount of time, but I have a friend of mine who is also in software development or has some background in this area, and he says it probably costs only 8 hours. And the answer here is that you need to go into enough level of detail. Ask your vendor to decompose those 40 hours into smaller pieces and see if it's reasonable and what's in that bucket of work. Sometimes it may be that that person who told you that it takes 8 hours, he or she may oversee something. Maybe he doesn't know any specific about the project or any requirements that are related to this, or maybe he's right and the vendor is not including something in the estimate, and you need to find out this. And openness here the answer. So don't hide this from the vendor. Just tell, okay, somebody told me that it's 8 hours. Let's discuss. And a good software vendor, good development partner will explain you and adjust if needed. Sometimes that makes sense. Thank you for that question, Jane. Thank you very much. And then I see a question from Karen Miller, and the question is, are there any estimation templates? Okay, great questions. In fact, yes, we do have templates. We use them all the time when we got a new project proposal request, and we do have some templates that are reused every time, and they include all the work items that are usually needed, like testing, project management, any tech debt management, and some common functionality. And also we have a big, vast library of the projects and project documentation that we built for our previous projects. And there are big chances that the system that you need, that we built something similar in the past, or some other system has components and parts that are very similar. For example, some integration with a payment system, or some machine learning speech recognition, logic, or virtually every topic. And with our previous experience, we reuse the estimates and the knowledge of the industry and technology that we have from the previous projects, and we reuse it as templates when preparing estimates. Thank you for the question. Even more questions here. Eric is asking, there is always room for contingency planning. How do normal companies cover these risks? That's also an excellent question. In fact, we do usually include some contingency plan in our estimates. Usually it is a line item or several line items in the project proposal that cover those risks and contingencies that may happen. This is simply some additional budget that is estimated based on our previous experience for the similar projects, and that budget is then being used in case if we face something unforeseen. For example, some new functionality or that may be needed, or some changing requirements. For example, some platform requires different fields compared to the regional expectations, and then we have that budget, and this budget is just used in case if such situations happen. It's not usually a big portion of the estimate. It may be 10% or 15%, depends on the project, but it's quite a good and reasonable thing to have in the estimate to make it more realistic, because if you have risks, you need to plan for those risks, and if you have some budget to cover those risks, you are on a safe side, so that your project budget will be met and your timelines will be met as well. Thank you for an excellent question. And also I see a question from Dennis Schultz. It's about what do you do if underestimate? Okay, and so this is an interesting situation when something was estimated. We used our techniques and our previous knowledge, and something goes wrong. We do not fit into that budget. For example, for a certain portion of the project, certain component of the project, component of the system. This happens, and I would say it does happen more or less frequently. Every project may include tasks that may require more budget than expected originally. The good thing is here that some of the tasks may take fewer amount of time, and if we see some item that takes more time, then we also look at other items that we deliver. If there is extra space, extra time that can be saved from those other items. Then there is contingency planning, as mentioned in my previous answer. We usually recommend our clients to include such line item, and such risk can be covered by this. And also the agile approach, you and your development partner and the team need to monitor closely the project budget, how it performs, and if that risk is high, you see that some of the significant part of the project may take longer, then you can, and your development partner can address this somehow by optimization techniques. Okay, thank you for the question. And then I see more questions from Luis. Is it common to ask to interview the programmers when looking for a company? Oh, why not? Yeah, some of our clients, they ask to talk with our team on some specific developers or DevOps or QAs before starting a project. This is a good idea, actually, because it gives you a better understanding whom you are dealing with, and you may see if they're a good fit and what are their strengths, or what things you may need to think about to cover some risks. We do plan such interviews with our developers if requested. And obviously, once a project is on a go, when it is already started, our clients usually have direct communication to the development team. You know those people working on your project. You communicate at least once a week, and you have about the estimates, and this obviously helps to give the realistic estimates as well. Okay, and I guess that's the last question that I see here from Norman. Is the time and effort for quality management included in the sprint budget, or they separately considered? Time and effort for quality management. All right, sure, yes. That question is twofold, and my answer will be probably also twofold. There are, I would say, several aspects of quality management. One is the quality of implementation of certain feature or function or web form, whatever it is. So our expectation that the estimate for a certain function, it includes a reasonable amount of testing done by the developer who develops that feature. And that estimate already has some time and capacity for the quality result. But then we also usually have a room, a task, and every sprint may have a certain budget for QA, for quality assurance. This is the work usually done by QA engineers who test the features developed by the developers. It's a very good idea that QA engineers are involved, because no matter how good a developer is, he or she may be overlooking something. It's always a good idea that another person takes a look at what is being developed. And then there are unit tests. We recommend our clients to include unit testing in every single project being built. Depending on your budget constraints, depending on the state of the project and how complicated it is, the number of unit tests and unit test coverage may differ. It can be just a few unit tests for the critical functionality, or nearly complete unit test coverage. But anyhow, we ask this to be included, and there are line items for unit testing as well. And also, we normally do also code reviews. So the team of the developers, they review their code in a peer fashion. So one developer is performing a task, another developer reviewing the code, and this helps to maintain a reasonable level of technical depth and manage it. So this is another consideration, and this consideration is to be done upfront when you are planning the project and estimating it.
All right, Gregory, I'm back.
Great.
I think you covered all the questions by yourself. You don't even need me. That's great.
All right.
All right. Thank you, everyone. So we appreciate you being with us today, and hope you enjoyed our first webinar. Thank you, Gregory, for conducting such a great webinar, and also the Q&A section. So stay tuned for our next webinar in the beginning of December, and check your inbox for an invitation. Thanks again for joining us today, and see ya.
Thank you. See you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.